And this optimism that he's speaking of when he says, oh, I've talked to Israeli ministers, from what I'm hearing, I don't get a lot of optimism from the Israeli side. Most of what we're hearing right now that's generating all this buzz is coming from Washington and the Pentagon and the U.S. side that's making this seem and sound like we're closer than I think some of the Israeli side actually truly believe we are.
The US President Joe Biden has said he's optimistic that a deal on a ceasefire and the release of hostages in Gaza can be reached. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is returning to the region, and negotiations are due to resume in Doha next week. Joe Biden said we're closer than we've ever been, but Hamas officials are reported to have said that there's been no progress so far and mediators are selling illusions. Well, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy is visiting Israel with his French counterpart and has held talks with senior Israeli ministers. He expressed optimism at the prospects of a breakthrough. Well, Zach Anders is a journalist in Tel Aviv. Good afternoon to you, Zach.
Hi, good afternoon, Carol.
Great to have you with us. Some rather conflicting signals coming out about the state of these talks. What's your assessment of what's going on?
Well, we have to remember that Hamas is not there. They're not sitting down in Doha like they have been throughout months of negotiations, and the dynamic has changed considerably since the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. As you mentioned, the sources from the Hamas leadership team that is abroad, not in Gaza, have been sharing their doubts. They, like you mentioned, there said this was an illusion, that any optimism here is an illusion. They're also saying that, we agreed to a deal on July 2nd, and that Prime Minister Netanyahu added new terms, and that any hope or a belief that we're going to agree to these new terms when we had a deal back on July 7th is, as Hamas's own words, again, an illusion.
What about the visit of the British Foreign Secretary, David Lammy? He has also been sounding optimistic, saying that he's hearing from Israeli ministers they could be on the cusp of a deal. Clearly, he and his French counterpart, who's travelling with him, are pushing very hard for all sides to do whatever they can to try to make some sort of a breakthrough here. Does the British Foreign Secretary have much sway on events, do you think, Zach?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's some hesitance within the Israeli government right now to include at this point in the process any new names or figures. Obviously, the labor election is taking place, 6-7 months into this conflict, when the negotiating teams and everyone involved has already kind of linked up and locked arms with a few key names in the U.S. and, of course, the Qataris and the Egyptians. And that's a very tight-knit, closed bubble. So I don't think a lot new figures or other leaders are making their way into any sort of decision-making process there. And this optimism that he's speaking of when he says, oh, I've talked to Israeli ministers, from what I'm hearing, I don't get a lot of optimism from the Israeli side. Most of what we're hearing right now that's generating all this buzz is coming from Washington and the Pentagon and the U.S. side that's making this seem and sound like we're closer than I think some of the Israeli side actually truly believe we are.
The US, of course, does have a role in these talks, and we're hearing that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is heading back to the region, will be trying to put further pressure, certainly on the Israelis, to reach an agreement. Do you think the presence of Antony Blinken could in itself be significant, given that I think it's just a few days ago he actually pulled out of a planned visit?
Yeah, and he's the closer. In baseball terms, he would be the pitcher that you bring in at the very end of the game to try and win the game. And his role is not going to be in the negotiating room, at least it hasn't been for the duration of this conflict. His role is to shuttle around the Middle East and get everybody else on board. So when he comes in here, he's often flying to Amman and to Istanbul, and to make sure that the I mean, this is going to be, when it's all said and done, a ceasefire and a hostage exchange like this is going to be a massive deal that involves guarantees with multiple countries, not just the ones that are listed. Everybody's going to have a stake. This is going to be a region-wide, a Middle East-wide deal that gets done. So he's got the CIA director, Bill Burns, and the one of the special diplomats from the Biden administration, Brett McGurk. Those are the ones that are sitting down at the table representing the U.S. Blinken will come in and shuttle around those different capitals to try and seal the deal when we get to that point. The U.S. side was saying we think maybe there's going to be a chance for a deal by the end of next week, and that's the hope. So that trip and his travel dates do coincide with that. But again, this is a lot of positive talk from the U.S. side, and being here in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the Israeli folks and some of these, second-degree connections to the negotiating team, they're very concerned that still Hamas is a terror organization that might be saying one thing right now, but when it comes time to have actually someone sign off on this, and that's Yahya Sinwar, who is deep inside the tunnel network. The Hamas delegation has even reported that they've had trouble even connecting with him and sending him some of these bits of information. That's how disconnected he is at this point. So this still has a ways to go. And every moment that they talk about, well, the finish line is in sight, that finish line is at the very top of the mountain, and it's going to be an incredible challenge just to even get get a signature from the man who's going to be signing this from Hamas, Yahya Sinwar.
And there's so much riding on this, isn't there, Zach? The US President Joe Biden has said that he believes that Iran is only holding off carrying out a reprisal attack on Israel for that attack on a Hamas leader on Iranian territory in Tehran, that Iran is only holding back from a reprisal because of the possibility of some progress in these talks.
And you can also look at it in the inverse, which is Iran representing Hamas in kind of a pseudo way here, could be telling Qatar, which we know that the Qatari foreign minister and the Iranian foreign minister spoke together last night by phone. Iran could be pushing and saying, accept these terms, Israel, accept these terms, the United States, or expect our wrath, that we will be attacking at some point, that we choose the right to avenge Ismail Haniyeh, who was killed in our territory, in our capital city, Tehran. So you better think twice about trying to push really hard on these two last points that we are hearing are the main obstacles, which is who controls the Philadelphia corridor. This is the border between Gaza and Egypt. Israel wants to stay along that border, and Israel also wants to control the movement of Palestinians from the south of the Gaza Strip, where most of the people have migrated or been forcibly displaced, I should say, moved into this area. Israel wants a new mechanism now to monitor with checkpoints anyone that's going north into the Gaza Strip and into Gaza City. So that's new additions that we heard were added in the month of July. And that's what Hamas keeps claiming, is we accepted this deal without these two agreements or these two stipulations, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu added them on. When you zoom out, though, to the Iranian attack, I get a sense that with each passing day, there's a bit more relief within the Israeli establishment that they feel like they've deterred an Iranian attack. But we're not entirely sure, as I'm getting more alerts now of, and looks like, another attack coming from Hezbollah in the north, in the northern Golan right now.
Well, that is certainly a very clear indication of the risks of wider conflict. And Zach, in that case, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, I hope you can get to some shelter.